My name is Daniel Brooks, and until last year I was Senior Process Architect at ForgeTrack, a Denver logistics software company that sold predictability to manufacturers terrified of downtime. I mapped value streams in plants from Indiana to Arizona, cut waste with DMAIC and SPC, and taught project teams to love standard work. My dashboards were crisp and merciless. Under my lead, on-time deployments rose from 87 to 97% in 2 quarters, churn fell by 9 points, and a plastics client outside Cincinnati credited our module with reducing expedited freight by $2.3 million. I liked being the person a floor manager could call at 2 a.m., knowing I would turn noise into a plan. I was born with single-sided deafness and wear a cochlear implant on my right. It means crowded rooms blur, but work is solvable. I ran meetings with cart captions, tight agendas, and visible decisions. I insisted on follow-ups in writing so no one lost the thread. Clients loved it. My VP, Rick Halverson, loved the board applause. After the applause, small things shifted. Our stand-up moved from a quiet conference room to the bullpen beside the sales gong. My reimbursement for captioning software sat in, pending, for 6 weeks. A new policy required vendor negotiations by phone, even though our platform supported accessible video. Travel invites thinned when flights were tight and factories were loud. HR said they were, evaluating accommodation options under ADA Title I, and asked me to be patient. Patience is a process step, not a stall tactic, but the emails felt like stall tactics. I kept building wins anyway. In November, I launched a micro course on inclusive facilitation that cut workshops by 20% without losing quality, and 23 clients completed it in the first month. Rick smiled, clapped my shoulder, and told me to keep my head down because results speak for themselves. Then I heard a new word in the echo around meetings I was no longer invited to. Unreliable. It never appeared in my performance file. It lived in hallway air. Quiet is where decisions breathe. It is also where storms begin. The storm broke on a Tuesday in December. Rick called it a calibration. HR called it a conversation under the interactive process. We met in a glass box that magnified every phone ring on the floor. I asked for our usual captioner link. The invite had none. I opened my laptop and watched the words try to guess the room. Rick slid a document across the table. Performance improvement plan. 90 days. 4 objectives. Close 3 vendor negotiations by phone. Travel on 48 hours. Notice 2 dynamic environments without special room setup. Facilitate 2 plant floor Kaizen events in open spaces. Deliver a new playbook for reducing meeting time by 20%. I looked at the 4th. It was the micro course I had already built and delivered. HR said the new expectations aligned with the essential functions of the role. I said the first 3 contradicted the accommodations already approved under ADA Title I. Mara from HR said they were evaluating whether those accommodations posed an undue hardship. The captioner guessed, undue hardship. It missed the law. It caught the intent. I did the work. I scheduled site visits that offered private rooms and written agendas. I sent vendors email scripts for negotiation that preserved a clear record and met the business goal. I offered alternatives and documented each one. Rick kept asking for just a quick call and forwarded sales emails that praised speed over clarity. He copied legal as if I were a risk. 2 weeks in, my byline disappeared from the micro course in our LMS. The title changed to ForgeTrack Efficiency Playbook. The content was identical. My facilitation sequence. The decision matrix. The checklists. Gone was the section on accessibility that tied those gains to inclusion. I asked our learning lead what happened. She said Rick wanted a unified brand. I asked if my authorship would be restored. She said leadership preferred anonymous modules. The module went live on our client portal the same morning. Rick told me a major industrial client in Phoenix wanted my workshop but preferred someone more flexible. The person assigned was a recent hire who had shadowed my last 2 sessions and copied my notes verbatim into his OneNote. He stopped by my desk to ask where I saved the templates. I closed my drive and stared at my hands. The PIP demanded travel to a plant in Chicago in January. The itinerary had back-to-back floor walks, no private room, and a wrap-up call from the loading dock. I wrote a careful email. I offered to arrive a day early to meet the team in a quiet space. I asked for cart for 2 key sessions. I said I would do the walk if decisions were captured in writing. I attached a cost breakdown. Cart was $120 a month. My airfare was $460. The cost of a bad decision on a noisy floor was unquantifiable. HR replied that additional services were not approved. I went anyway. I did the work in the cafeteria between lunch rushes. I led a silent sticky note brainstorm when the speaker system blared. The plant manager thanked me for a day that felt decent in a place that rarely did. I gathered sign-offs. I shipped a clean report. The performance tracker in our HR portal still showed me red. The termination came on day 64 of a 90-day PIP. HR cited restructuring. My position was eliminated, effective immediately. My badge stopped working by 3 p.m. At 4:12, a requisition opened on our careers page. Senior Process Architect. Heavy travel. Must be. Nimble in high-noise environments. The listing used copy from my old job description with one sentence removed. Commitment to accessibility. I sat in my car in the cold garage and listened to the fan spin. I felt anger rise like a tide and press against my throat. I pressed my palm to the implant and waited for the pressure to settle. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I opened my laptop and started printing. I printed the PIP. I printed my reviews. I printed the email thread where I asked for accommodations and proposed alternatives. I printed the expense report where captioning sat unpaid while a sales dinner at a steakhouse moved through in a day. I printed the LMS changelog showing my course title and authorship replaced at 8:13 on a Monday. I printed the job posting. I labeled everything with dates and tabs. I wrote a memo to myself after each meeting with times, names, and exact words. I backed up my workshop templates, my checklists, and my research on inclusive facilitation. None of it was proprietary code. All of it was my method. When the pages cooled, I called the number a plant manager in Ohio had given me 2 years earlier and told me to use if I ever needed real help. His sister was an employment attorney. I said my name, the company, the city, and the words HR had used. He put me on hold for 20 seconds and came back with a quiet voice and a direct plan. In the days that followed, I filed an intake with the EEOC and with the Colorado Civil Rights Division. I described a pattern. Denial of the interactive process. Retaliation for requesting accommodation. Adverse action masked as restructure. Theft of authorship that rewrote my work as if inclusion were ornamental. While the government systems processed, I processed the loss. I woke at 5 a.m. without an alarm and reached for a calendar full of flights that no longer existed. I sorted the house and dusted a shelf I never noticed. I ran in the park without earbuds and listened to the city wake. Shame tried to sit on the couch beside me and name me as the problem. Data answered with a line of clean, dated facts. I had not failed the job. The job had been rewritten to make me fail. That realization was both heavy and clarifying. Grief gave me space to feel the hit. Discipline gave me a pen. The first letter from the EEOC assigned a charge number and said an investigator would contact me within 90 days. It offered mediation. My attorney, Lynn Gable, explained that mediation could surface the truth faster than litigation and preserve my energy for building. She also explained the standards with the calm of a surgeon tracing a scar. ADA Title I requires a good faith interactive process. Employers must provide reasonable accommodations unless they can prove undue hardship. Essential functions must be real, not invented to exclude. Retaliation for requesting accommodation is unlawful. Hearing those words organized the past year into a clean root cause tree. I was not a poor fit. I was a cost center to a manager who prized applause over law. The injustice wasn't a single meeting. It was a system that treated inclusion as a nice to have until it interfered with someone else's convenience. Once I saw the system, my plan wrote itself in the blank space that appeared when my calendar went quiet. I listed assets, methods that worked in loud plants and small rooms alike, a facilitation sequence with measurable gains, data from deployments that cut expedite by millions and meeting time by 20%, a network of line operators, plant managers, and IT directors who had watched noisy rooms become clear. I needed a container to hold those assets and a signal strong enough that the right people could find me. The name came first, Signal North Consulting. I liked the way it sounded on a cold morning. I registered the LLC in Colorado, opened a business account, and asked Lynn to review a master services agreement with clauses for AD audit confidentiality, data ownership, and survivable payment terms. I priced my work to match its value and my runway. $275 an hour for advisory, $18,000 fixed for a 2-week starter sprint, a retainer for ongoing change management. I wrote scope statements that fit on one page and promised outcomes clients could verify without me in the room. I built tools that clarified what I had been doing on instinct. The signal-to-decision ratio, a simple metric that tracked how much of a meeting produced actionable decisions versus how much dissolved into crosstalk. The 4 C's checklist for any critical session: captions, channels, cadence, and closure. An interactive process audit that mapped requests, responses, and timeliness against ADA standards so HR could see risk before a lawyer did. A maturity model from level 1, ad hoc, personality-driven, to level 4, documented, inclusive, self-correcting. I wrote a white paper with plain numbers. At Darnell Plastics, inclusive facilitation reduced cycle time for change approvals by 36%. At a packaging plant outside Tulsa, captions plus turn-taking cut rework by 12%. I never named ForgeTrack. I did not need to. The value lived in the work, not the grudge. I layered a simple go-to-market on top. A website with 3 pages and no fluff. A LinkedIn series called Quiet Wins, where I shared one micro-tactic a week and the math behind it. A webinar, Speed Without Crosstalk, co-hosted with a car provider who agreed to a discounted bundle for any client who signed with me. I emailed 12 people who had introduced themselves after workshops to tell me they felt seen. Floor supervisors, a VP of operations at a competitor in Minneapolis, the plant manager in Chicago who had watched me rescue a cafeteria session. Each note was short. I'm building a firm that treats inclusion as process control. Here's the starter sprint. Here's the ROI math. Do you want to pilot in Q1? I expected 1 reply. I got 7. 2 asked for NDAs. 1 asked for January dates. 1 asked a question that named the opportunity I had not dared to write down. Could you review our facilitation approach before we roll out a new module we're building to compete with ForgeTrack's efficiency playbook? The question told me my former employer's rivals were watching the same market and saw the same gap. ForgeTrack had rushed my stripped-down module into client hands. Competitors wanted something better, truer, and lawful. If I taught them to build inclusion into the bones of decision-making, they could leapfrog the superficial fix and claim the ground ForgeTrack thought it owned. I wrote a positioning statement I repeated until it lived in my breath. Inclusion is not an add-on. It's a control plan. If your process cannot hear, it cannot learn. If it cannot learn, it cannot win. I took a yellow pad and turned that sentence into a product ladder, starter sprint for quick wins, and a baseline signal-to-decision reading. A 3-month implementation where we baked captions and cadence into meeting templates and trained facilitators to manage signal like they manage inventory. A 6-month license for my toolkit with quarterly audits and a certification that their clients could cite in RFPs to prove they knew how to run inclusive ops. While I built, Lynn queued our legal path. We accepted EEOC mediation and prepared 3 exhibits that told a simple story. Approved accommodations ignored. Retaliation after requests. Adverse action disguised as restructure. We included the LMS changelog not as an IP claim. I knew work for hire meant ForgeTrack owned the module, but as evidence of motive. Strip the word inclusion. Sell the method. Erase the author who insisted on access. Lynn cautioned me not to wage war in public. Let the process do its work. Document everything. Build a business worthy of the energy the fight would steal. I listened. I printed the calendar invite for mediation, and then shut the legal folder and turned to the business one. At my kitchen table, I ran numbers like a plant controller. Severance, 8 weeks. Health insurance, COBRA if needed. Savings, 6 months runway if I lived small. Target, 3 starter sprints by March, 2 implementations by June, 1 license by year end. Break even at month 5. Profit at month 8. I wrote a 1-page operating plan with dates, owner's me, and triggers. If inbound fell below 2 leads a month, publish a new white paper. If demos stalled, schedule free office hours for operations leaders with disabilities. If travel grew too loud, build a studio for remote facilitation proof of concepts and show skeptics the numbers from a quiet room compared to a floor walk. Discipline felt like a hand on my back. I slept for the first time in weeks. The morning came clean and cold. I opened my laptop, checked the captions, and hit go live on a company I believed in with the same calm I used on a chaotic line. Quiet would be my advantage. Signal would be my brand. And justice, when it arrived, would be a milestone, Not my business model. The first starter sprint began in a windowed conference room in Minneapolis with Northridge Software, a ForgeTrack competitor that built scheduling engines for mid-market manufacturers. Their VP of Operations, Tara McConnell, wanted a fast proof that inclusion could move numbers. We started with baselines. I ran a week of signal-to-decision readings across 5 standing meetings. The average was 0.41. Less than half of the time produced concrete decisions. Crosstalk ate the rest. I did not shame the teams. I showed them the math. Then we turned knobs. Cards on for all critical sessions. Cameras on for facilitators, so hand signals could manage the queue. A visible decision log projected in the room and shared live to remote attendees. Tara watched the first session lean forward, as if a dial had shifted on the wall. By day 5, the ratio hit 0.73. Cycle time for change approvals fell from 12 days to 8. On day 10, we ran the same Kaizen event 2 ways, once on the plant floor at 10 a.m. with forklifts humming, once in a quiet room at 2 p.m. with structured turns. The floor session produced 3 ideas and 1 partial decision. The quiet session produced 7 ideas and 5 signed actions with owners and dates. Tara's CFO asked for cash impact. We pulled last quarter's expedite spend and mapped it against cycle time. The model showed a projected $1.1 million annual reduction with the new cadence. He signed PO 11,872 before dinner. My invoice cleared in 48 hours. Phoenix called next. Saguaro Components was the client Rick had reassigned when he told them to pick someone more flexible. Their plant manager, Lila Benavidez, had kept my card. She said the line was suffering from decision fatigue and she did not care what it was called as long as it worked. I flew in with a plan. 2-day audit, 1-day design. 4-week coaching. We ran the audit on a Tuesday. The break room was the only quiet space, so we built a war room with painter's tape and a rolling whiteboard. We mapped their Monday Tier 3 meeting and counted every time someone had to repeat themselves. 38 repeats in 60 minutes. The signal-to-decision ratio sat at 0.29. The line leaders were exhausted before lunch. I pulled out the 4 C's. Captions on the monitors. Channels defined before the meeting began. Cadence enforced with a visual cue. Closure captured in a decision table that printed automatically to the shift book. By the 2nd week, missed handoffs dropped by 25%. By the 4th, scrap due to misunderstood change orders fell 12%. Lila took the chart to her GM. He walked into our last session and asked where this had been hiding. I said it was not hiding. It was drowned out by noise. He asked if he could tell other plants. I said yes and placed a copy of the license agreement on the table. My webinar, Speed Without Crosstalk, aired on a cold Thursday in February. I expected 40 people. 206 showed up, including 4 titles with Chief on their cards. I built it like a factory tour. No slides with slogans. A walk through an actual agenda with captions on, a facilitator managing a stack, and a decision log that closed before the hour ended. I invited a cart partner to demo their service without a sales pitch. The chat filled with plant acronyms and quiet relief. We ended 5 minutes early by design and sent a 1-page ROI sheet with formulas. Leads came in while I was still thanking attendees. A Tier 1 automotive supplier in Ohio, a food packaging company in Fresno, a medtech assembler in Austin that had just chosen Northridge over ForgeTrack for scheduling and wanted to differentiate their implementation with an inclusivity certification. I had built the certification draft in a notebook. Now I turned it into a program, facilitator training, audited templates, quarterly signal-to-decision targets, a badge their sales team could cite in RFPs. The first 2 clients bought immediately. The badge lived on their websites within a month with a link to a public report. Not a sticker. Proof. Inside Northridge, I moved beyond meetings into code. Their product team wanted to embed quiet defaults in their UI. We sat with designers and wrote settings that honored human limits, captions toggled on by default, a queue for speaking requests in the video module, a built-in decision table that exported to the ERP with owners and due dates. I drafted language for release notes that respected ADA and avoided marketing gloss. We wrote a short legal memo for their counsel that tied these features to risk reduction under ADA, Title I, and state disability laws. By launch, sales had a story that was both true and measurable. In their next bake-off against ForgeTrack, they showed 5 slides, a noisy room, a quiet room, 2 charts, A procurement manager's quote. The evaluator circled the badge in the corner and said it answered a question their own HR had been asking for a year. Northridge won the deal with a margin they had never seen. Meanwhile, the EEOC mediation date arrived. It met me in a federal conference room with a round table and a pot of old coffee. Lynn sat at my side. On the other side were Rick, a corporate counsel in a Navy suit, and a new HR director who kept glancing at a script. The mediator outlined the process. Joint opening, private caucus, shuttle. I spoke once. I described my role, my accommodations request, the PAP with essential functions rewritten as obstacles, and the termination at day 64. I did not raise my voice. I handed the mediator a binder with tabs. Accommodation email. Expense denial. LMS changelog. Job posting. The words felt like dowels locking a frame. In caucus, Lynn carried the conversation. I focused on breathing and the part of me that had work to do in the afternoon. When the mediator returned, he said something I did not expect. They want to talk about training. Not an apology. Not yet. A contract. They had seen my webinar. They had clients asking why their modules did not support accessible meetings by default. They wanted to buy my program under NDA to train their facilitators. Lynn smiled without showing teeth and moved the binder aside. We would not sell silence. We would structure a settlement and a separate commercial agreement that acknowledged the value of the methods they had dismissed. We left with a term sheet draft and a meditation I could live with. Justice and business could move in parallel without me bleeding on the carpet. Work spilled into spring. The weekly, quiet wins, posts found their rhythm. Not viral, useful. A plant in Indiana added a huddle timer and shaved 6 minutes off a daily meeting without losing content. An aerospace supplier replaced its speakerphone war room with a small studio that let 8 engineers hear one another. They emailed a month later with scrap rates down 3 points. Signal North hit the financial targets I had written on my kitchen table. 3 starter sprints by March. 2 full implementations by June. The first year-long license before July. I kept my studio small, my templates tight, and my promises humble. Each engagement ended with a client teaching a new team without me in the room. That was my KPI. Autonomy. One afternoon in May, Tara at Northridge forwarded an RFP from a national consortium of manufacturers. The RFP included a new section I had not seen before. Decision-making accessibility and inclusive facilitation. It asked for proof, not a statement. Metrics, training records, a third-party certification. Whoever wrote it had taken my ladder and turned it into procurement language. It made me laugh in my empty studio. Then it made me quiet. Systems change one clause at a time. I opened a fresh folder and named it Climax, not as a story trick, but as a project tag. The work was about to crest, and I was ready. The request for proposal from the manufacturers. Consortium narrowed to 2 finalists by June. Northridge with my inclusive facilitation program baked into their rollout, and ForgeTrack with the stripped efficiency playbook. The final evaluation would be a live scenario in Cleveland with procurement, operations, legal, and human resources all at the table. I spent 2 weeks with Tara's team building something that felt less like a demo and more like a shift change. We recreated a multi-plant change control meeting with real constraints, a supplier defect, a regulatory deadline, and a noisy feed from a remote site. We measured everything. Baseline, signal-to-decision ratio, time to assigned action, error risk if a step was missed. When we walked into the room, I did not sell features. I turned on captions, set a cadence, assigned a scribe, and began the work. 28 minutes later, we had 4 signed decisions, owners, and dates. The chair of the evaluation committee asked how much of that result depended on me. I pushed the decision log to the screen and showed the template, the Q discipline, and the training records of 3 Northridge facilitators who could run the same play tomorrow at 6 a.m. She looked at legal and then back at me. She asked for the number everyone in that room understood. Cash. I pointed to cycle time and expedite spend, and I named a projected annual impact of $3.2 million across their plants if they met the weekly targets built into our license. She wrote it down without looking up. ForgeTrack followed with a pitch about speed and culture fit. They set the meeting in a bullpen layout and kept the phone line open to show they were nimble. Crosstalk filled the air in the first 3 minutes. Their facilitator lost the thread twice. A remote manager asked for a repeat and was told they would, catch it in follow-up, Legal raised a quiet eyebrow. Human resources asked where accessibility fit into their standard operating procedure. The answer sounded like a slogan. The chair thanked them and ended on time. When the door closed, the committee began a short private debrief I was not supposed to hear. I still caught the tone in the hallway, not the words. Calm, decisive, relieved. An hour later, Tara and I were back in our hotel lobby when her phone vibrated. She took the call, listened, and then put me on speaker. The consortium had awarded Northridge a 3-year contract with 2 optional years. Their notes named inclusive facilitation and third-party certification as the differentiator. They wanted the certification report public so their suppliers could see what good looked like. Tara covered the mic and breathed out a laugh that sounded like a valve easing. I felt the quiet come up through the floor and settle behind my sternum. The best kind of quiet. Earned. While the evaluation calendar moved, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission process moved too, slower, but steady. Mediation yielded a draft conciliation agreement. Lynn walked me through each clause like a pilot calling a checklist. Back pay for the months between termination and my first contract. Compensatory damages for the adverse action tied to my accommodation requests. A neutral reference clause and a no rehire clause that I welcomed. A commitment by ForgeTrack to update its accommodation policy, to train managers on the interactive process under Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and to post a notice in the Denver office acknowledging employee rights. A 1-year monitoring period with quarterly reports to the agency. No admission of liability, which is how these things usually read. But the remedies spoke louder than any press release. The part that mattered most to me was not the money. It was the paragraph that required outside training for facilitators who ran client meetings. The paragraph suggested a vendor list. Lynn slid her pen toward me. We propose Signal North as an approved provider at standard commercial rates. No discounts, no gag clauses, no confidentiality that would dim what clients could learn. Their counsel blinked and asked for time. A week later, the answer came back yes. On a warm morning in July, I signed the conciliation agreement at Lynn's conference table, and I felt a strange mix of grief and completion move through my chest. I had wanted an apology from a particular man in a glass office. What I got instead was a binding document that would change more than one conversation inside a company I had once loved. I took a walk around the block, returned, and signed this separate commercial agreement that put Signal North on ForgeTrack's list for facilitator training. Not a trophy, a lever. Lynn shook my hand, and I saw the tired lines at the edges of her eyes soften. We did not celebrate with champagne. We went back to work. The public win arrived 2 weeks later, when the consortium issued its release. They named Northridge as the awardee and cited measurable, documented improvements in decision quality and time to action for multi-site operations. 3 trade publications picked it up. One analyst wrote a short note that surprised me. He called inclusive facilitation the new uptime, and said vendors that built it into their implementations would win the next cycle of software decisions. The note mattered in a way I could feel in my inbox. A medical device company in Minnesota wanted a license. A steel fabricator in Pennsylvania wanted a starter sprint for 2 plants. A military subcontractor asked whether my certification program met federal procurement requirements. I answered with numbers and clean language. No drama. The work traveled ahead of me like a clear tone through a crowded room. The personal confrontation I had avoided arrived in an email from a familiar address. Rick asked for 15 minutes. His subject line said, "Professional courtesy." I agreed to meet in the lobby of a downtown hotel at noon. He arrived in a suit that did not fit as well as it used to. He made small talk and then apologized, the way executives apologize when they have practiced in front of a mirror. He said the company had moved fast and that he had trusted the wrong advisors. He said he had always respected my talent. He said he wanted to explore a broader partnership to align our methods with ForgeTrack's go-to-market. I listened until the line between apology and pitch became visible. Then I did what my values required. I thanked him for the apology. I said the agreements in place defined the only work we would do together. I said my calendar was full with clients who had believed in inclusion before it was fashionable. He pressed, softly at first and then with urgency, and I saw the ego under the language. I stood, shook his hand, and wished him well. He tried to hold my gaze. I let mine rest on a point just beyond his shoulder, a place without heat. Later that week, LinkedIn told me he was in transition. Now, I felt no joy in that notice, only balance. By August, the first Northridge sites carrying our certification hit their signal-to-decision targets for 2 quarters in a row. Their sales team added a line to every proposal that said, simply, decisions you can measure. ForgeTrack posted a new release of their playbook with a section on accessibility that looked familiar in structure, if not in spirit. That was fine. The market would test all claims. I kept my studio quiet, my templates open, and my door wide for the next plant manager, who wanted their floor to feel like a place where decisions breathe. The victory did not feel like a fanfare. It felt like a room that used to be loud, settling into a tone the human ear and the human heart can hold without strain. It felt like work worth doing. I still keep the binder with the tabs on a shelf above my desk. It reminds me that justice can be a set of small, exact steps. A request recorded. A policy cited. A timeline preserved. The conciliation agreement did not heal everything. It did something better. It changed the incentives inside a company that had once used the word reliable as a mirror for its own comfort. Managers there now learn the interactive process the way they learn safety protocols, not as a favor, as law. That is not revenge, it is maintenance. Systems require maintenance, or they drift. Signal North is larger than the kitchen table where I wrote the first plan. A team of 4 consultants now flies with me or meets from quiet studios in their own cities. 2 are professionals with disabilities who had been told they were not client-facing. Their calendars are full. Our certification has helped 20 plants hit their signal-to-decision targets for 2 quarters straight. A procurement lead in Ohio wrote that their change approvals feel clean for the first time since the pandemic. A floor supervisor in Texas sent a picture of a decision log signed in grease pencil on a whiteboard, then scanned into the ERP. No slogans. Only proof. People ask about forgiveness. I do not know if that is the right word. I know about alignment. I do not need to forgive a policy. I need it to work. I do not need to forget a meeting. I need the next meeting to produce a decision that holds in the noise of a real day. The law gave me a frame. Process filled it. Values gave it weight. I am not angry when I walk into a plant that once used my old company's software. I am focused. I watch a room settle as captions appear. I watch a facilitator hold a stack and land a choice at minute 54. I watch the body language of the person who used to be talked over ease by degrees. This is dignity in motion. The lesson is not that I won. Winning is a headline that fades. The lesson is that competence paired with integrity compounds. Respect is measurable. It looks like a cue that lets every voice land. It looks like a cycle time chart that bends because the meeting had order. It looks like a job description that keeps the essential functions honest. Underestimation is a short-term strategy for people who climb on applause. It falls apart the moment the market is asked to measure outcomes rather than myths. When a company underplays the person who insists on access, it undercuts its own capacity to learn. A system that cannot hear cannot improve. A system that cannot improve cannot compete. I finish most days the way I began this story. Quiet. Not the quiet of isolation. The quiet of a room prepared for decisions. I think of the people who first trusted me with their teams when I had a logo but no history. I think of that December morning when a PIP tried to rename my work as a problem. Names do not define what is true. Results do. The moral is simple and hard. Respect people and the systems they need to do their best work. Build inclusion into the control plan, not the brochure. Invest in what is right, not what is easy. If you are underestimated, do not shout. Document, design, deliver. Let the room get quiet, and then let the numbers speak.